Weather-wise, it's been a pretty weird start to the year. Meteorologists say this summer is one of the most unusual they've seen, and now scientists are trying to work out what will happen in the future. We know the southwest is drying while the north is getting wetter, but predictions are that whole climate bands will move down the WA coast, bringing northern heat to traditionally cool areas. Here's Claire Nichols.
Even though we look at things night after night, year after year, and they don't change, there are always things changing in the universe, and they are millions of kilometres away, they're millions of light years, and yet there are still changes going on in the universe.
Phil Smith has been looking into the Bunbury sky for 20 years, and while he's looking for shifts in the stars, he can't help but notice the changes closer to home.
It's definitely getting drier. I remember when we used to, in the 70s, for instance, things were always flooding. You would have heavy rains and the rivers would spill out onto the paddocks. Doesn't seem to happen anymore.
After living in Bunbury for 4 decades, the keen astronomer, fisherman and bushwalker is concerned about Bunbury's change in the weather. In the time since he arrived, rainfall across the southwest has dropped by about 15%. Now he wants to know what will happen next, and while the answer may not be written in the stars, the prediction on paper is grim. According to the Weather Bureau, Bunbury is a barometer for changing weather right across the southwest of WA.
We have this area in here where we've got a rapid decrease in rainfall, far more reds, and another fall off in here since the beginning of this century. This high pressure system is staying where it normally sits during summer for much, much longer. That's preventing these cold fronts from moving up, and we're starting to see the onset of the winter rains coming much, much later.
The rain is starting later and not lasting as long, and while the southwest dries out, the temperature is climbing.
It's not going to be ever upwards. There will be breaks and we'll see warmer and cooler years, but nevertheless the trend for the next 30 to 40 years is definitely a continuation of the drying and of the warming.
In Bunbury, the weather is expected to change so much, the CSIRO predicts it'll feel more like Geraldton in just 40 years.
And what we did was we looked at Geraldton's current weather and climate, and we looked at the predictions for Bunbury, and we reckoned that there was a pretty good match.
The CSIRO has just released a new report comparing the two cities, looking for trends in planning and preparation that could help Bunbury adjust to the weather of its northern neighbour. Would you like weather like Geraldton's here in Bunbury?
No. I go to Geraldton occasionally and I love the place, but if you ask me to pick which weather I'd prefer, it's the southwest weather. Thank you.
The responsibility is likely to fall on the shoulders of the Bunbury Council. It's already considering what the changes could mean for future housing design, drainage and water supply. Amid the concerns about drought, the council also needs to consider flooding, which could come with rising sea levels.
Local councils across Australia are very aware of this issue, and they're all doing what they can. Of course, a lot of it is governed by the resources that are available to them, but certainly a council like Bunbury is really quite innovative.
As the weather changes in Bunbury, the forecast in Perth is changing too. The CSIRO predicts the number of very hot days, where the temperature climbs past 35 degrees, could triple in Perth by 2070.
Well, Perth is exactly the same situation as Bunbury. We've just had in 2011 our warmest year on record. Our previous warmest year on record was 2010. So the 2 warmest years on record have occurred in the last 2 years. Again, it doesn't mean that this year will be warmer again still, but the trend is upwards.
And that too could have an effect on how we prepare and plan for the years ahead.
Heat waves are quite serious health risks. So the elderly, the sick and the young are more at risk from heat waves. So again, people's way of adapting to that and building codes and making sure that you can keep cool at night is quite critical.
While the southwest dries, it's interesting to note that the total rainfall across the state is actually increasing. While the rain has dropped off significantly in the south since 1970, it's been getting progressively wetter in the north. Scientists say that's because the summer wet season is becoming more active. And as well as the rain, the north is bracing for more wild weather. Just a week after Cyclone Iggy bore down on the Pilbara, the CSIRO is also predicting a change in the behaviour of cyclones. A new report says while they'll decrease in frequency, they'll increase in intensity, with storms after 2051 more likely to be Category 3 or higher. That's due to rising ocean temperatures and more moisture in the air. It's also predicted cyclones could decay up to 100 kilometres further south than usual, meaning communities that aren't normally impacted or prepared could face a cyclone threat.
And each cyclone behaves as an individual, and it's very, very difficult to draw a line with such a small database. So we've really got to have a lot more study into this before we can make any definitive statements.
The Weather Bureau wants more information, and that's where Peter Flanagan comes in.
It's only recently that people are saying the weather's so hot, the weather's changed, something's wrong. We've noticed it a long time back, and we're saying something's got to be done about this. And if we can go out there, we can risk our lives, we can risk our vessels to be able to do this. What a pleasure.
After a lifetime on the water, the South African sailor wants to help scientists learn more about our oceans and how they affect the weather. He and his crew of volunteers have spent the last 6 months sailing the Indian Ocean, dropping robotic floats that measure the changing conditions in the waters off WA.
That data is going to satellites, down to research stations, and being used by the scientific community and operational oceanographers to understand the phenomena that we're interested in.
For Peter Flanagan, the mission isn't only an important one for our future, but a real-life adventure.
I'm not as good as Indiana Jones. I don't do so well with a whip. But there is a lot of adventure in science.
While Peter Flanagan braves the high seas to help predict changes in the weather, these amateur scientists in Bunbury are keeping their eyes on the sky. Like the meteorologists, they're looking to the past in the hope of discovering the future, one that it's hoped we'll be ready for.
Claire Nichols with that story.